This is Joe Cook interviewing Stalingrad O'Neill, who was born in 1951 in Dublin. Can you tell me a bit about your family background?
My family background. My father at the time was a commercial traveller. That is, like I assume, is selling goods and things like that. He didn't quite go door to door, I'm sure, but he obviously went to various firms selling stuff. Um, his father was owned a shop, but his father died early in his childhood. I suppose his father died when he was in his 40s or something like that. His father was one of those people that wasn't much good at anything. So I think it was some people who suggested that he open a shop. He used to have a shop in Shop Street, Drogheda, which was a kind of tobacconist and Christmas card, birthday card type shop. Stationery, sorry. But I don't think they sold newspapers. I've no idea. Then during the Civil War, they moved to Dundalk. In Dundalk, they opened another shop, and at some point, my grandfather died, and my grandmother run the shop and brought a family of four up. There was two brothers and two sisters. My grandfather also used to run a cinema, or he used to hire films and show them in. I can't remember the name of the hall, but he was an early pioneer of cinema in Ireland or Drogheda, or anyway. So my father grew up in Dundalk. I think at the time people were quite religious. Always one son went to the priesthood, and that was my father. When he was in his 20s, I suppose, he joined an order. I think it was the Franciscans, but I can't remember what exact order it was. It was the one that took the vows of silence and poverty. It didn't agree with my father, and the tale is that during his first week, he got fed up with the regime, and when he was asked by the head abbot to clean the hall with a bucket and mop, he threw the bucket and mop at the head abbot and told him to clean it himself. Left the seminar, jumped on a train to Belfast, and joined the RAF that night. He arrived. It was the war, so he's seen service in Iraq, Ceylon as it was known then, and various places. I think Egypt was another one. Did I say he joined the RAF? He was part of the ground crew that repaired the airplanes. I think he had his wings. There is a photograph of him there, but I'm not quite sure. I don't think people spoke to him till after the war. When as a prodigal son, he arrived back. Sometimes in the 60s, he married my mother in 1929, I think. He got special dispensation of the Pope, who, I don't know who it was. But somebody's got the frame with the special dispensation written on it. My mother, she was from a working class background, where my mother's father was a soldier who had served in the First World War. He also served in the Second World War, all in the British Army, and then served in the Irish Army as well. Once Ireland declared independence or gained its independence, he had a brother who was actually killed in the First World War. I think there was a number of other people like related to us in Dundalk on my mother's and my grandmother's father's grandmother's side. My father's mother's side. The Callahans. A number of them were killed in the First World War as well because they served in the British Army. And that's about all I could say about my family. But most of my family, as such, lived in Drogheda. I've got a number of cousins, called the Murrays. That was my father's sister. I think there was 14 surviving from Mary Murray, who was my father's sister. And she married Sean Murray, who at one time was in the IRA, but then joined the Irish Army. I don't know what position he was in the IRA. Nobody speaks about it. He couldn't have lasted long because he rose to the rank of a captain and then was in the GPO. Had quite a good job. But I do remember once during the Troubles, like that's the 60s Troubles, going around the house and everybody was very interested in it. And then my aunt says to me, "We don't speak about the IRA in this house." Anyway, my father had another sister called Esme, who she travelled the world, I think. She was in Australia for a while. But she eventually settled in Coventry, and she's got a son and a daughter, Sean and Mary. Mary is still in Coventry, and she occasionally writes to me and always sends me a Christmas card. Sean, well, he's around somewhere. He's a bit of a musician, and he originally was in a band in the 80s called Micro Disney, which was a kind of indie band. I'm not quite sure, but because I was into reggae, I never really listened to that thing. But my brother Andrew, the youngest one, was a big mucker with him. So what else I can say about them, I don't know.
Could you tell me a bit about your uncle?
Yeah, you probably mean my Uncle Canis. Well, he was the second brother he was the second son of my grandmother on my father's side. He worked his way up and became the town surveyor, which I believe in Ireland is quite important and far more important than being a mayor. He wrote a number of scientific books on aspects of surveying. I'm not quite familiar what surveying is, but like it's to do with building roads and bridges and whatever. I'll leave it at that, I think. He also looked after my mother when my father died. He stayed in Dundalk all his life, and he died only a couple of years ago. But he was quite interested in history and stuff like that. He was always in contact with my cousin Seamus, who was on the Murray side. Just an interesting person. I would also like to go back to my mother's side of the family. Now, my mother's mother, that'd be my grandmother on that side. I mean, we spent a lot of time with them after my father died. However, before that, she'd worked in England during the war in munitions productions. She was also some form of nurse as well, but I don't know what kind of nurse. Probably just a dressing station or something like that, helping the wounded and shit like that. So, my mother had a sister. Her sister was Phyllis. They had a large family as well. Most of them stayed in Drogheda, whereas the Murrays actually left. That's my father's side, his sister, and Australia. There are a number of them, and also in Italy as well. I suppose it's the religious aspect there. Because I gotta say, my Auntie Mary, she was absolutely fucking insanely religious. Sorry about swearing. Anyway, there was always a thing when we was kids, because you go over to your cousins and you play with them, and they're a huge family and things like that, and they're all the same age as you. So I used to go over, and of course I'd always forget that my aunt was religious, and there was a thing. It's died out a lot now, and it was big in places like France as well, where people said the Angelus at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Everything would stop and they'd say the Angelus, which is a load of long, long prayers for about half an hour, quarter of an hour, something like that. And you'd go round and you'd always go in the back door, because they had a huge house and it was on a kind of like a farm type thing, but it wasn't a farm. It was kind of like it wasn't even a small holding, but it was a big garden and they had chickens and dogs. And you'd go in and you'd see everybody kneeling down, and you think, oh well, and try to close the door.
Could you tell me a bit about your cousins growing up?
Yeah. My cousins, there was the one set of cousins that I knew. I didn't actually know the ones in Dundalk a great deal. In fact, I was never in contact with them until later on in life. But growing up, I always knew my cousins, the McCabe's, which were on my mother's side, and the Murrays, which were on my father's side. And they were two huge families, just like us. There was 7 in our family. Actually, there was 8, but one died a few months after being born. But mostly, I hung around my cousins, the Murrays. Now, my aunt was very religious. And she was religious all the way till the day she died. And she died when she was 90. But eventually, she couldn't control even her own kids. So the religious thing died, except for herself. I always remember, I used to always go around me cousins, and you'd always go in the back door. The house itself was built on a hill, had a huge garden. They kept chickens and loads of dogs, and they grew cabbages, potatoes, and stuff like that. So I'd go round and we'd play but you'd always forget that me aunt was religious and kept to certain things that the Catholic Church did. At the time, there was this thing in 60s Ireland, and it was in France as well, but I don't know when he died out in France, but people used to pause whatever they were doing and say the Angelus when the Angelus bells rung. That was at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. And being a kid, you'd always forget that, because you weren't bloody that interested in religion anyway. And I'd go round and I'd open the back door, which was into the kitchen, And then you'd see a load of me cousins kneeling, saying the Angelus. And you'd think, oh hell, time to go. And you'd try to close the door when suddenly a hand would come out and grab you and make you kneel down and join in with the Angelus, which was quite boring because it was quite long. The cousins on my mother's side, like McCabe's, Joseph, he was the eldest of them. I mean, I didn't actually... The cousins, the Murrays, Sean and Canis were quite old, but you'd never see them around. It was always the other lads like Seamus and that. But Joseph, he was a nice lad, a great laugh we always had with him. And he was a bit of a wayward lad, so we really liked hanging around with him, running around with him. But eventually, he got a bit too wayward and got sent off to one of the industrial schools, which was Artane, which really was like a borstal. I remember once we all went scrumping apples. I don't know what they call it. Scrumping they call it in this country. Progging they used to call it in Ireland. And we got in. And of course we didn't realise the bloke was growing peas and things like that. So he had all nets up and things like that. And when we got into the garden, we got ensnared in all these pea nets and things like that. And then the dogs started barking and howling, and we had to run for our lives and create more damage. And I always remember, because I knew the kid whose father owned the garden, and he was complaining then at school that teddy boys had broken into his father's garden and destroyed the place. Well, we hadn't destroyed that much, really, but that was the story.
Could you tell me a bit more about your childhood?
Yeah, I mean, at certain points, when I was 3, we were migrants to this country. That meant, I came over, I don't know, at some point when I was a baby. I can always remember my mother telling me this tale, how she lived in Varna Road and Borsleith. Now, Varna Road was part of the red light district at the time. It's gone now, all that red light district, and they changed the names of the roads and everything. But it actually exists still, Varna Road, but it's not called Varna Road, and it's been split in 2 as well. But it lasted as a red light district right up until the 80s, I think. However, let's go back to when I was a child. My mother used to put, obviously, you'd have them old Blue Cross prams or Silver Cross, I can't remember, old-fashioned prams. And she was pushing me or my brother Canis in a pram down the road, and some curb crawler come up and asked her for business. Going back to Ireland, I spent a lot of time in Drogheda when I was kids, either coming home from England or when we settled there. We settled there when I was about 6 till I was about 11. So it was just like a small town, hadn't been built up. I mean, obviously it's a lot bigger now because people stayed, but people used to emigrate a lot. So the town would never expand much because young people didn't stay. So obviously people didn't marry there and people didn't have, well, obviously they did have kids. It's wrong of me to say that because I had 14 cousins in one lot and maybe 7, maybe even 10 cousins in the lot. The McCabe's, as I said, I didn't see a lot of them apart from Joseph. But Murray's were a different thing. But we were a big family ourselves, so sort of self-contained, if you understand what I mean. Myself, I don't know, when I was a kid, I used to just get up. I used to be always interested in nature. Not very scientifically, though. Collecting birds' eggs and things like that, which were considered okay at the time. But I used to like, going out, getting frog spawn, breeding the tadpoles into frogs. And I used to like catching fish as well, they call them sticklebacks in this country, but we used to call them pinkeens. I don't know why. Maybe it's because like the male has a red breast or what. I haven't got a clue. We used to go to a place called Maggie Dolan's Glen. I don't know if it was owned by Maggie Dolan at all, but that's what it was called. And you just hang around with loads of little kids, because you are a little kid. And everybody, because there was fields, everybody went to fields and shit like that. We didn't have a television either much. In fact, I don't ever recall having a television until I come to this country in the 60s. We had a radio, but of course, being kids, we weren't really interested in music and stuff like that. It just wasn't that era. I think you still had Elvis Presley and Louis Armstrong, Connie Francis. I can't remember. I mean, I really didn't get into pop music until I actually came to this country.
Could you tell me a bit about your first school?
My first school was St. Edward's. Was it? No, it probably wasn't. Look, the problem with me is I was a migrant. I moved from Ireland to England and then back to Ireland again. And my schooling was broke up, probably in periods of 6 months, until I actually stayed in Ireland for we settled because my grandmother died. My father inherited the house, which was a shop, which ended up in disaster. However, I'll go on to that some other time. Schooling, I went to the Christian Brothers in Ireland. I went to the ones in Dundalk and I went to the ones in Drogheda. They were both bastards. I also went to school in England, Catholic schools. Originally, I went to St. Edward's, which is in Rattlebarn Road in Sally Oak. They were quite brutal and bastards as well, because in them days, they give you the cane. I always hated Miss Sheen, who was the headmistress. And she used to do show trials of kids. I remember these kids who were morons, really. Somehow they had got a load of matches, which was a death sentence or a caning sentence. Not only that, but they had a battery as well. Now, being kids, they thought they could light the matches under the battery and create an explosion. Of course you can't. But it didn't make any difference. They were hauled up in front of a school assembly and sentenced to the cane. And there was a number who had just looked on, and they were lucky. They didn't get the cane, but they got a bollocking. Anyway, going back to Ireland, I do actually remember. I also went to a kind of primary school which is run by the nuns. And they didn't quite like us either. The problem was as well that all these religious orders had this attitude that if you were in school, if you attended school in England, or you'd even gone to England, then you'd mix with the filthy black Protestants. Therefore, you were always suspect. And anything that went on, even though like often it was other kids as well as me, you were the first and only one that was picked out. But I do remember this kid. He was a scruffy kid. I'm not saying we wasn't scruffy, because we probably were. People were very poor. And I remember once, for some reason, she decided to give everybody, the nun who was running the classroom, decided to give everybody a treat. And then we were sent to get this tin which was full of sweets. I don't know why we didn't rob some, but I suppose it was a religious upbringing. And we brought it back to her, and then she started doling out things like licorice pipes to all her favourites and whatever. And then she turned around to me and this kid who'd brought in the sweets and proceeded to give us a dressing down, tell us what useless kids we were. And she didn't even want to give us a sweet, but in the end she gave us a gobstopper, which was kind of like a consolation prize, I suppose, because everybody wanted the licorice pipe, but we didn't get it. I don't know, and we were sent back with it, and I still don't know why we didn't rob the tin. Well, items out of the tin, shall I say. Then, like, I went to the Christian Brothers. They were quite brutal. In fact, one of my cousins, the Murrays, I think, suffered a lot more than we used to suffer at their hands. Child, he might have been molested. I haven't got a clue, but he certainly took them to court eventually. However, with us, it was just abuse and being caned. Well, it wasn't caning actually. Only like the lay teachers. That's the ones who weren't in a religious order and were just ordinary members of the community who were teachers. Those who wore a fucking habit, like the Christian Brothers, were quite brutal bastards. And there was always this big thing about learning the Irish language. And I resisted. There wasn't much I resisted, but I did resist that. And also, it was incomprehensible to me. And I could never understand why you would want to learn a language unless, I mean, for start off, you go around Ireland and like the names of towns and things like that are huge in English and then small in Gaelic underneath. Well, I'd have thought it would be the other way round. It should be huge in Gaelic and small in English underneath, but it's not the way they thought, the government. And the government also were quite happy to allow the Christian Brothers to run schools and things like that, meaning they didn't have to pay many lay teachers to do the job that they should be doing. So the Christian Brothers didn't particularly like us because we were filthy black Protestants, even though we were Catholics. But obviously, like, we'd spent time in hell in England, and we're bringing back undesirable propaganda to quite ridiculous. I remember this bloke, Brother Fatty. He was a right brutal bastard. In fact, he was so brutal that he bruised my brother's hand one time when he gave him the strap. And my father was home from England, and just so happened my brother come home because they used to send you home at dinner time. Ireland was a very poor nation. They didn't give you dinners. You had to go home to get your bread and jam. And I always remember a tale as well when we was at the nuns, because the nuns run an orphanage as well, and they had this thing like one day. How do you? What did you have to eat for dinner? And all the lads from the orphanage got up and said, "Oh, I had roast dinner and two veg and things like that." And all the kids that actually, day kids, Well, I had bread and jam, miss. Or sister. You'd have to call him sis, you couldn't call him miss. So it was eye-opening. Everybody else had bread and jam, but the kids at the orphanage lived better than us. And yet, we were always told it was terrible for the kids at the orphanage. Well, I suppose it was, but you don't think like that when you're a kid. You probably don't even recognise your mother and father. Anyway, Brother Fatty. Back to Brother Fatty. My father noticed the bruises on my brother's hands. So it was dinner time. So he took my brother straight up to the school and walked straight into the lesson when old Brother Fatty was there in front of the blackboard and hauled him by his dog collar up against the blackboard in the air and threatened. He said to him, "Only you're wearing a dog collar, I'd put you through the blackboard." So Brother Fatty didn't particularly like us. It seemed like he was afraid to hit my brother ever after that, but he wasn't afraid to make snidey remarks and get kids to have a go at us. That's the way he got round it, which was quite annoying. But in the end, like as kids, you always become friends. Doesn't really matter what you do. I always remember also swinging on my grandmother's gate while I was supposed to be at school, and I'd been ill, probably, or probably not. Somehow I wangled it, and unfortunately, what I forgot also, because you're a kid, you forget all these things. The road to the playing field where they played hurley and Gaelic football, and it was owned by the Christian Brothers, went past our house. So the Christian Brothers and the lads who'd done the sports would always pass our gate, and it just so happened I was swinging on the gate when old Brother Fatty come down with a few lads, and he was about to have a go at me. And I see you, I'm just about to have a go at you. When my grandmother come to the door, and it's, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Clark, how are you? I'll get you later." So that's roughly what we did. And also Dundalk. Dundalk was again like problematic. Didn't have so much of the old black Protestant stuff there though. But we did have like trouble with the teachers, but they weren't too bad. I do remember a teacher. I used to have this kid as well, Burton. I don't know who he was, but he took an instant dislike to me. And he was quite a fat lad, and I wouldn't say wealthy, but they were much well off than most of the kids in the class. And he was also a little grass as well. He'd grass you, and it would be a lie what he'd tell. The one time we were all playing down because it'd be raining or something like that. You'd be allowed to stay in the classroom until they threw you out if you made too much noise. But we were all jackassing around the bottom of the class. And it must have been the first time the teacher had ever been down the back of the class for 20 years or some shit. And he clocked that he had a couple of maps of Ireland, huge maps, that somebody had painted. And then they'd done the mountain ranges in putty. Well, some of the mountain ranges had dropped off. And it just so happened he noticed that these mountain ranges had disappeared. And he goes, "What's happened here then, lads?" And of course, Burton pipes up, "It was him, sir." A total lie. So he dragged me up the top of the class and asked me to confess, otherwise he was going to whip me. And of course I wouldn't. And I turned round on him because he accused me a bit too much. And I just got mad. And I grabbed him by his shirt collar. Of course, I'm 8 years old. He's a bloke of about 40 or 50. So he just pulled me up by my shirt collar like and dragged me down the hallway and said he was going to whip me and all this stuff like. But he didn't in the end. And he called the headmaster, and I had to apologise to all the class because it was late and they were all going to stay in until I apologised, so I had to.
Can you tell me any more childhood memories?
Yeah. The reason I left Mullingar, well, it's not true, but the reason we left Ireland, but at the time we moved back to Ireland kind of permanently because, as I said previously, at some point, my grandmother on my father's side died. He inherited the shop. He had it done up to 1960s standards. So that meant like we had a bathroom, a real kitchen. And up until then, the only bath I'd ever seen, besides other people's houses, was a tin bath. Because people still had outside toilets and things like that. So we lived in this shop, and my mother was supposed to make it a going concern, but she had absolutely no head for business at all. She was absolutely chronic at it. And of course, the shop got into difficulties. It went bankrupt, and we had to close it down. And we spent a number of weeks existing on money that was sent from England or money my mother managed to scrounge from some place. But it wasn't enough, so we left the shop and went to my grandmother in Drogheda, whereas my father then arrived back from England because he was working. He may have been working at Cadbury's or he may have been working at Leyland. His job, like when he was in the Air Force, was an engineer. So he was employed in both these places as an engineer, the Cadbury's and the Leyland or the Austin or whatever it was called at the time. So he died suddenly from a heart attack when he come back. So it meant that my grandmother and my grandfather had to support us, a family of 7, including my mother, with a pension. Or they were on some sort of soldier's pension, which wasn't really much. Obviously, it was just enough to get them by. So we spent about 6 months, maybe even a year, until my grandmother just got fed up with my mother and told her it was time she got herself together. And my mother's idea of getting herself together was heading for England and more poverty. I remember, like, when I was a kid, living at my grandmother's, we used to go around, like, during the summer we'd gather things like blackberries, scrump apple orchards, and we'd collect coal at the docks. In them days, the docks were quite open. You could always walk to the docks. I remember even, like, when I was a kid, there was a fella who used to run, maybe that's not the right word, drive a bulldozer on the docks because there was loads of gypsum a kind of rock that they use in plaster, I think. I don't know where it was mined, but it was obviously nearby. And he used to bulldoze it into the holes of ships. And of course, there was no health and safety in them days. And I remember being friendly with a lad who was his nephew, and he used to let us ride the bulldozer with him, like, while he was doing this. Which today, like, he'd have been arrested. But we never thought anything of it. And further down the docks, like, there was coal yards. Now, because we hit a poverty level, like, almost running, when my father died, we had to look for ways to help me grandparents and things like that. And one of the ways I noticed, like, there used to be this old lady who used to live across the road from us. I mean, she was like the epitome of being considered a witch and things like that. She lived in a tumble down mud wall cottage which was thatched, and it collapsed in on itself because, like, obviously she was so old and she just couldn't afford it. She seemed to have a son or a grandson who was, well, he must have been, he seemed like he was really old, but he probably was only about 15 or 16. And I always remember this tale my brother told me. They were out, because you could walk out to the, we had a seaside, but it wasn't really a seaside, like Blackpool or someplace like that. It was just a beach. And it wasn't far. You'd walk 2 miles down the River Boyne and you'd reach the beach. And my brother always tells me, like, he met him down there. I don't know this lad's name, but anyway, he met him and he said to me, brother, are you coming in for a dip? And my brother said, no, I've got no swimming trunks. And your man says, oh, no bother. And he took off his jumper and put both his legs in his jumper and went into the sea and had a dip. Anyway, back to the town. So she used to glean coals and things like that had fallen over the wall at the coal yard. We'd done the same. And we used to take it home. I could never understand my grandmother. She used to say, oh, Eddie, I can't think of the name, his second name. He was the coalman. And Eddie Malloy, probably. And she used to always take the coal that we gleaned and put it round the corner, because, like, that's where the coalman didn't dump the coal. And I could never understand it. I understand it now, but I couldn't understand it then. Anyway, after about 12 months, I don't even know, we probably went back to Dundalk, but I haven't got a clue. At some point, my mother just thought, well, I can't afford to feed the kids and I can't do anything. And she realised, because my father fought in the Second World War, she could get a widow's pension here in England. And we also had a house here, but it wasn't a very good house. It was in Elliot Road in Sallyoak, and it was designated for slum clearance before even slum clearance became popular. And I think it was, what do they call it? Compulsory purchase. And she got £600 for it in the end when she was moved. And I mean, £600, even, I know houses went a great deal of money in them days, but that was pretty dire, even for a house. But we had to up sticks and move to England. It happened when I was about 11. And that's when we more or less permanently settled here. I mean, it's true, like, 2 of my brothers and my sister eventually went back to Ireland, but they didn't do that till they were about 16. And the irony was, like, my two brothers were born in England anyway, though my sister was actually born in Ireland. And my sister's still there in Ireland, whereas one of my brothers passed away and the other is in England now and has lived here permanently for, I don't know, that's 20 years or so.
Can you tell me some of your early memories of England?
Yeah, England's very dirty. I went to school in Northfield, a Catholic school, again. My mother insisted on religion, even though she never went to church, but she always insisted we did. My mother hit the bottle at times as well. We were quite poverty struck. We shouldn't have been, but we were. And I won't go into details about why we shouldn't have been, but my childhood was quite poor. I'm not saying there wasn't people around Salioak that weren't in the same boat as us, because there were, and I became friends with some of them. I didn't see much of Birmingham as a kid, because we lived over that end of Birmingham, like, I don't know whether it's north, south, west, I can't tell you, but the Salioak end, which means, like, we went to school in Northfield, so it was Salioak, Northfield, Longbridge way we actually went. I didn't actually come to places like Moseley or Sparkbrook until I was in my teens, like 16, and left home. Salioak, people still use coal fires. I'm sure people had central heating, I'm sure people had bathrooms, but we certainly didn't. And we still had an outside toilet. And the next door neighbours were the Lewises, who didn't have any kids, but George was a bit of a lad that didn't like working too much. Occasionally he got work as a dustman and things like that. He always collected stuff. I mean, they were nice people, but they weren't very wealthy. And next door to us, we had an English family called the Great Batches, who actually had a car, which was quite unusual. There was about 4 or 5 kids there, but I always remember the Great Batches because they turned their garden into a turkey run. They always had turkeys, whereas we just flattened our garden, and the next door's garden, and the next door's garden, and it was like a row of 4 houses. I do remember Miss Day, who was the owner of the last house, but she died at some point, and obviously, even in them days, her relatives hadn't thought much of even claiming the house. It was just let to go rack and ruin. The windows fell in. Probably we helped push them in, and the toilet walls fell down. I can remember that was my fault. I remember standing there once. I mean, there was a big crack in the wall. I never thought of it because I was just a kid. And my sister was playing the garden. I said, Deirdre, look. And pretended to push it. And much to my surprise, the entire wall collapsed. And then we things like we used to jump at the back bedroom window. Well, it wasn't really a bedroom. It was a box room. But me and my brother slept there. And it used to leak as well. And I can always remember, I think there was a mattress thrown out one day for some reason. And if you run across the back, there was a coal shed and the outdoor toilet, which is about 12, 15 foot up, like, from the ground. You could run across it if you were really fast and jump onto the mattress. And it was a great thing. We used to do that all the time. And then, of course, like my younger brothers like Pascal and Rafe started imitating us. And Pascal was a complete idiot. He pushed the whole window out. Luckily, we managed to push it back before it broke. But, you know, what do you expect? Young kids imitating their elders. And I do remember George Lewis giving me a bike. It was an old-fashioned, bar brake bike. One of them old black ones, like an Enfield or something like that. I can't remember. I learned to ride that bike. And also, when I was a kid, because we were poor in Surrey and things like that, we used to do gardening rounds. And because we were kids, we realised we weren't going to get as much as a proper gardener. So we offered to do the job for 2 and 6.5, for an hour, which was roughly the half price. I think a normal garden would have got 5 bob, 6 bob per hour. So we built up a nice round, and some people just took pity on us. And there was a couple of fellas who were keen gardeners, and they actually taught me a lot about gardening. And then there was these women as well up on Oak Tree Lane, 3 sisters and things like that. But they'd only employ us until we were 12. But it went through the whole family. We just said, oh, we got another brother that's younger, because obviously they might have been a bit worried that the older you get, the more you might think of robbing them rather than working for them. But they were really nice women, they're all teachers, and they all had something to do with United Nations for children and things like that. Very well educated. Interesting story there, when they died, there was somebody bought the house, and there was always, I always remember it, there was always like this hawthorn tree that had obviously been a hedge at one point, but then it grown, the one end had grown into a tree, and then kind of leaned over from the division of the 2 properties over the garage, so nobody could open the garage doors. And I always remember the woman saying, there's a car in there, and I used to go, oh, I'd like to have a look at that, but they never let us have a look at it. But I don't know what happened to them, but when they died, or when the property was sold and this bloke took it over, they found the car, and the car was actually like a vintage car. Is that what they call it? Classic car from the 1920s. And it would appear they were quite well, because she used to tell me, her father used to take them out in the car, but I didn't realise, the father used to employ a chauffeur to drive the car, and they found the chauffeur's gloves in it, the chauffeur's hat, the chauffeur's coat, leather, and the only thing that was wrong with the car was that it had a bus tyre, and it's in the museum now somewhere, Birmingham, probably Millennium Point now. And that was it. But think about doing gardens. My mother used to tax us, and we used to call it a tax. And she used to demand half our money. And of course, we were quite hard working, me and my brother. So we built up quite a big round of people. We were quite kind to old age pensioners. We'd always do them at half price. So normally we'd charge everybody 2 and 6. We'd charge pensioners 1 and 3. Anyway, back to my mother demanding money. So we used to work it out and make sure she only got 1/3 of our wages rather than half our wages. And she could never find out how many hours we worked, really.
Could you tell me about going to school in Birmingham?
Yeah, Birmingham. I went to Archbishop Matheson's. It was a fairly decent school. They still use the cane and things like that. The headmaster was a bit of a org. He was one of those people that, oh yeah, it's got to keep fit, lads, you know. Oh, look at me, I'm in my tracksuit. Even before tracksuits were really popular. I think only footballers and boxers used tracksuits in them days. It wasn't casual wear at all. And of course, he could run round the field in the middle of winter in his tracksuit, while we had a fucking shitty pair of shorts and a thin fucking vest. And we were supposed to enjoy it. Of course, there were morons that did enjoy it. I hated football. I hated cross running. I hated fucking everything to do with sport. I always remember there was an assembly once, and it must have been like the annual cross-country championships for all the schools or something like that. And I always remember the headmaster getting up and going, oh, Jones Minor, or somebody such, come in 134th. And everybody looked at him and thought, what? And he goes, no, I know you lads will think that's not a very good position to get. But 6,000 children took part in that, so it's actually quite a good position to come in at. And we had 6 runners. And they obviously didn't do as good as 132nd, the rest. But anyway. So, I didn't particularly like him. I did like the art teacher. He was really good. And he taught me a lot. And they had that art class and things like that. So I used to stay late at school as well. The art. So that was part of the thing I enjoyed. School, it was just a school it was a boys' school as well. The girl, because like they taught like, you know, there's no such thing as co-ed. And even like in state schools, there was a bit like that as well. I do remember like they had Sally Oak boys. And some of my brother's friends went there because he would mix with Protestants. But I mean, I didn't really care myself either. It just so happened all my friends were in school at Archbishop Masterson's. We used to have to go to Cofton Park as well, which was miles away. And I can remember, because I didn't like sports, by that time I'd learned to forge my mother's signature. So I'd have a sick note, because like, they didn't particularly, as I said before, I don't know why it was, none of them, they always looked down on us. I suppose it's because we were really poor. And it showed. I remember the teacher saying to me once, yes, this sick note, he goes, it's like the Queen, isn't it? I don't know what you mean, sir. Well, let me explain. You know when the Queen, she doesn't gonna go somewhere? Yes. Well, she tells her minister to write her a note saying she's got a cold. And that's a bit like yours, isn't it? Well, you know what you can do? You can walk back to school. And that's about 3 miles. And while we were walking back to school, we got lost, me and this kid, because there was another one. Always is, isn't there? We got lost. Ended up God knows where, and asked directions and got sent on the right track and eventually arrived at school. Unfortunately for me, I made a wrong decision when I got back to school. I went into the classroom, whereas the other kid just went to the playground and waited till break. And I got collared and I got fucking whacked.
So could you tell me a bit about your teenage years?
Yes, my teenage years, obviously, as I said, we grew up in quite a poor working class area. And as I said, I had a little garden around and things like that. When I was about 16, my mother wanted me to go to further education. I wanted to go to art school, but at the time, they weren't particularly interested in working class kids going to art school unless you had a number of A levels or O levels, which I did make an attempt to get, because I did actually attend a further education college for about a year. I, at the time, I was starting to have a lot of issues with my mother. And as I may have mentioned before, my mother would hit the bottle on occasions. There was absolutely no way of actually having a educated conversation when she was in those states. I do understand why my mother was like that, but it didn't help me in any way at all. I, as I said, attended a further education place because I wanted to go to art school. But while I was attending it, I met with a number of wayward people, shall we say, who were at the same school and things like that. I mean, same college, and just started skipping lessons, as you do when you start trying to assert your own independence. We got in a bit of trouble with the police and things like. I think we had to attend a probation service. I think it was voluntary, but in the end, I got annoyed with it. I didn't want to stay at home, so I met a number of lads who'd already left home and were living rough. In those days, most of Birmingham, well, the inner city was being flattened to make way for supposedly better housing, but as events have shown, they weren't any better than. In fact, I think the older houses were far better, and all they really needed to do was just put bathrooms and things like that, regrade them up to whatever conditions or state they should have been in the. It would have been late 60s, 70s. I seem to have forgotten. Yeah.
What happened when you left school?
As I said, I attended a further education place for a year. Got a bit wayward. Then started asserting my independence. So I started going uptown and things like that, meeting loads of lads and lasses that were my age, that used to hang around the bullring, or the new bullring as it was then. And I found out most of these lads and that had already been thrown out of home or had just decided to leave home. Most of them didn't want to work because it was the 60s and we were all influenced by flower power and hippie era. But of course, hippie era was in San Francisco, really, not in Birmingham. However, we all grew our hair long. I had trouble with my mother about that. Eventually, I just refused to go home and started hanging around with these kids. We slept in derelict houses. We didn't actually beg on the streets because nobody begged in them days. I actually worked in the market for a time. I just happened to be hanging around a bull ring, and this bloke come in one day, well, clocked me and said, you want a job? And so I used to look after the store like on a Tuesday and a Saturday, I think, and maybe even a Thursday. It used to bring me in a little, it wasn't much money, but it was like a wage, same as anybody else would have earned, perhaps a little less. But at the same time, I still slept in derelict houses, hung around with these kids. Sometimes we used to go up Broad Street to a place called the Tow Road, which was opposite the Rum Runner, which was a nightclub. I wasn't into, although I know a load of people were into music and going to nightclubs at the time, which I obviously met these people later in my life. Maybe not too much later, but some years later. So basically that's what we did. We hung round all-night cafes like the Tow Road. I got to know people like prostitutes, rent boys, drug dealers, artisans, just night workers. Everybody used to, and even weirdos. You'd probably call them paedophiles these days. But most of the people I met, whatever their sexual preference was, were fine with what you wear and what you didn't want to do. In other words, like if you were straight, they accepted you as straight. We were, as I said, kids. So all this thing to us, like, yeah, I did come from a Catholic home and things like that. And it was originally a bit of a shock to meet these people, but like you accept it because it's just life. Well, street life, should I say. So I don't know how long I did that, sleeping in derelicts and things like that. My elder brother, Canis, who's dead now, but he'd already established himself in Moseley, and he had a couple of mates who were at university, and one of them had, well, a number of them had a house they rented as on the Pershire Road, and he got one of the lads to give me a settee to sleep on in his house or in his room or, in the rented place. And that's basically why I stopped sleeping in derelict houses and things like that. Then I moved into Moseley, where I rented my own house. Not my own house, sorry. I rented a bedsit. And through various ways, I wasn't always working all the time. I always had little scams going that, which I won't go into because some of them are illegal. In fact, some of them were very illegal. I never thought that it was a problem, and most of the people I hung around with didn't think it was a problem either. So I existed doing that. I used to do painting as well. Obviously, I have said earlier, I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a painter. So I just continued with that. I produced quite a lot of stuff. Most of it now is lost, or is it's around somewhere, but God knows. So that probably took me up till I was maybe it wasn't 20s, 18, and also I struck up a few relationships with girls. One girl I went to Brighton with. I stayed in Brighton for about 6 months. She was at art college, so she was an artist. She was quite good. Um, and I had a relationship with her for I don't know, maybe 4 years or something like that. But it broke up because I'm not an angel, and I'm quite stupid with things like that. And it was my fault, most definitely. But I just didn't think it wasn't done deliberately or anything like that. It's just one of those shitty things that happen because you're stupid.
Can you tell me about getting into journalism?
Yeah, journalism didn't happen until the 90s. By that time, I'd gone through a number of, I wouldn't call them life changes, but certainly I'd carried on with various scams and things like that, and various scams come to an end, and they didn't come naturally to an end. They were brought to a sudden end by the intervention of PC Plod, etc. And I was still in all this time, as I've said. I worked maybe not full time as an artist, but I would have spurts of about 3 months, 6 months where I do work. I also actually during that time, one reason why I actually became a DJ was because I've like-minded lads, but they worked in a band and it was called the Babylon Rebels, and they noticed that I could draw and things like that, so they started getting me to do their posters, and through that I met a number of people as well who I knew. Some were in the Irish community. The thing is, the Irish community never fell out of my orbit. The trouble started around the same time as I was living in Moseley and with the Birmingham pub bombings. Now, I didn't have a great deal of contact with what we call the respectable Irish, but I did know a number of people who you would say were on the political edge of the Irish. So I got into things like Troops 8. I also knew numerous people that were in the Birmingham Trades Council. So they were basically like Labour type people, trade unionists, were the kind of politics I associated with. Of course, I was more Republican than that, and I won't go into that either a great deal. So, going back to bands and things like that, I learned to do silk screens. It's still part of art, so I know how to set up a silk screen, do all that silk screen printing and things like that. And that wasn't particularly Irish. There was a lot of young English lads. In fact, two of the people I met in them days was a guy called Little Rob and Big Dave. Big Dave is no longer with us. But it's weird, when I started doing photographs at this pub called the Wagon and Horses in 2000, I came into contact with them again. David built the stage. Rob used to hang around at the at the gigs, and we rekindled our friendship. Going back to the Babylon Rebels and the bands I did, and to carry on through that era, shall we say. So I learned silkscreen. Used to do the band stuff. It wasn't just for the Babylon Rebels, but I always hung around with the Babylon Rebels because they always treated me better than all the other bands who used to just seem to think like that I'd just do it for them because I was such a great guy, and I'm not. I came to a position where I had a relationship with a woman who was also the mother of my kids, 2 kids I had. So, through that, I kind of took time out for family, I suppose, but I didn't really, because all these people I associated with still associated with us. It was what you call quite bohemian. And then I done when I was about 35. I should take that up to I was about 35. I'd done a mature students course. Well, actually, no, I didn't. Prior to that, this woman who'd looked at some of my drawings and paintings said to me that I should do a graphics course. I'd done a graphics course for a year in not Sutton Coldville, Solihull College. I didn't like the way it was geared towards a corporate image, and by then I was quite political, but I started becoming more Marxist, reading more Marxist stuff rather than just Republican stuff. And also, I think the Republican struggle was coming to the end stage as well. It was obviously long before the Good Friday Agreement, but it was still like stuck in stalemate, can we say. There wasn't going to be independent Republic of Northern Ireland like Cuba. And most people Republicans had ditched any socialistic content that they had and were just purely like for a republic. So I'd done this course. I didn't really like it, as I said. And through that, I met this girl. Well, I'd already known her for many years. But she'd mentioned to me like that there was a mature student course at Burnville College, which I'd been to prior to that, many years ago. And I ended up doing that for two years, and it was a polytech then, but it was just before it turned into a university. So my first year there was as a polytech. The second year, which I should have done, which I dropped out. Look, I dropped out, you know. Was a university, and part of the course was like, though I didn't take to it a great deal. Somebody had given me an OM 10, that's an Olympus 10 camera, and though it was like just a manual camera, it had this automatic little thing that you could push into it, which actually made it auto, so you didn't have to think too much. I found photography really hard to get into, but I met this lad, Gary Lechensky. Well, I didn't meet him, I'd already known him, but I discovered he was doing video. And he told me, he said, well, right, you don't know nothing about photography, but the camera settings you need to use is put the aperture on f8 and put the shutter speed on f60, and you'll always get a picture. This is the days when film was still being used. I mean, digital was still a twinkle in some, whatever they call it, Silicon Valley guy's eyes. Anyway, that's what I did. I had to work hard. You had to boil the stuff to get a picture, but it worked and you could get it. And it was only black and white. And then while I was doing this, I was at some demo or something like that. Not that I went to demos a great deal, well, it just happened to be. And I met Abbas Malik, who run the Birmingham operation for the Daily Jung. It's spelt like Jang, but it's Jung pronunciation. And he said to me, "Come with me. Oh, you take photographs. Come with me. I'll show you how to get rich." Well, he didn't show me how to get rich. He might have showed me how he could make money out of me. And so I started doing stuff for the Daily Jung, which was like doing photographs of hundreds of people who claimed they were in Asian political parties, but probably were just families. But they all appeared in the Jung. And the problem with that was it wasn't real journalism. And I still know people who still do that kind of stuff. You had to tap the geezer once you finished the shoot. The main man in the conference, maybe conference is not the right word, but the one who'd organised the rally, let's put it like that. You always have to tap him and make sure you got the money off him, because how it worked was all these people got their mushes in the paper, but the main man had to pay for some advertising. That's how it worked. You had to get his money because it wasn't really a news article, though it looked like it to the general public. And if you missed the guy, you didn't get the money. They wouldn't pay it once it was in the paper. So I worked for the Jung maybe 2 years and things like that. And I really had to make money anyway because I had a kid to fucking keep and feed. And 2, in fact. So through that I started doing a lot of the like socialist worker demos and various other, because there was no real Marxist or communist stuff. It was all Trotskyite-led organisations or Labour Party. Yeah, Labour Party even. And I really thought I was going to make some money. I really thought I was going to actually be a proper journalist as such. It never worked out like that. But I still think myself as a journalist. I still have... and also, I couldn't get into the NUJ, the union. You needed your press card. However, there were a couple of lads who were working and were members of the union. One was Miles Barter, who used to run a radio show. I don't know what it was called, but he was on BBC. The other one was Jeremy Deere, who was, he worked for the Big Issue for a while, but he had grander plans, which he became General Secretary of NUJ. But when I knew them, they were in Birmingham and they weren't as well known as they became. And they said to me, well, you want to be in the union? Well, you have to be the branch secretary and we'll let you in. And that's what I did. And I'm still the bloody branch secretary. I wish somebody else would take the job, but nobody wants to do it. So I started doing stuff like for various left-wing things. In them days, people who call themselves photographers didn't actually want to do any darkroom work because it's hard work and they just don't want to do it. And in those days, you'd do a contact sheet and there'd be only one photograph that was any good. Everybody else had their eyes closed or something like that. You'd be lucky if you got 2. You'd be even lucky if you got 4 shots out of a roll of 36 shots. Roll of film, I mean. And I just, through various places, like I think it was the Sparkbrook unemployed centre, they used to have a dark room. There was a thing called wide angle as well. You could go and do stuff there. They were all a bit of a trek, and I can understand why people weren't too interested in doing stuff once they took the photos and just take it to the chemist. But you couldn't take black and white shots to the chemist. Well, you could, but it cost you 36 quid or something like that. So I've done all this stuff myself, and I hit on the idea. What you do is, like, you do about 31 prints, the one shot that was any good, you do 36 of them, knock them out, get them right. It might take you, I mean, I used to work 9 to 5 days a week in a dark room, and you do 36 of these prints, and then you send them to every left-wing magazine and paper and Labour Party stuff. At first, like, people weren't that interested. You'd rarely get a hit. But I suppose after a while, so many of my photos were just hanging around their newsrooms. They thought, well, we need a picture. This'll do. And then you slap it in an invoice. And to tell you the truth, like, they used to pay decent money. It probably wasn't as much as some of the established photographers, news photographers I'm talking about. I'm not talking about people like, what's his name? Terence Donovan and who else? I can't think of his name. But anyway, it kept me. And then digital came along in the early 90s. And at the time, I got a scanner, a digital scanner. So it was a hybrid type thing. I was still taking film, but I was scanning it digitally. Obviously, it took a lot more work, and I also gave up the darkroom as well. I did have my own darkroom at that time, which somebody had let me use in one of these, I don't know whether they were further education colleges, but anyway, it was a college of some sort. Nobody used a darkroom, so they said I could use it.